That hand came down before I had time to understand what was happening. 1 second I was sitting at my own kitchen table, the table my wife wiped down every single morning for 30 years while she was still alive. The next second silence. Then a thick ringing in my ears. My glasses knocked sideways off my face. And my daughter-in-law standing there, her hand still raised, breathing hard like she had just finished something she had been waiting a long time to do. He sat still. Not because I was afraid, not because of the pain, but because something inside me, something that had been quietly enduring for so many years, had just broken completely. Not loudly, not dramatically. Like a rope pulled too tight for too long that finally snaps, without making a single sound. I am 71 years old. I have hauled nets on the Pacific Ocean in storms that other men wouldn't dare look out the window at. I have signed the papers that buried the woman who was my entire life, signed them with shaking hands and dry eyes. I have sat alone in a hospital corridor at 3 a.m. and called no one, because I didn't want anyone to see me like that. I am not a man who breaks easily. I am going to tell you what happened next. Because this is not just a story about a slap. This is a story about 35 years. And about the price that people who think they will never have to pay end up paying anyway. Don't go anywhere. Stay with me. My name is Walter. I am 71 years old. I spent 32 years running a commercial fishing operation out of Astoria. Oregon started with 1 leased trawler and a crew of 4, ended with a fleet of 9 and contracts running up to Alaska. I sold the business in 2018. I am not telling you this to establish that I am a man of means. I am telling you so you understand that I have spent my entire adult life reading weather and reading water and reading the faces of men who want something from me. And the face of my daughter-in-law, Claire, sitting across that breakfast table on a Sunday morning in September, was the clearest weather I had ever read in my life. She wanted the cabin. The cabin sits on a half-acre parcel above Burnt Lake, 30 miles east of Portland in the foothills of the Cascades. My late wife Diane and I started building it in the summer of 1989. We did it ourselves, mostly with a contractor named Pete Warfield, who drove a truck held together by rust and optimism, and laid the most beautiful stone hearth I have ever seen in any house I have ever been in. We finished it in the fall of 1990, and we had Thanksgiving there for the first time with a Coleman stove and 2 lawn chairs because we didn't have furniture yet. Diane cried a little when the sun came through the window and hit the stone. That was the kind of woman she was. She cried when things were beautiful. I miss that about her every single day. That cabin held 34 years of our life. First snows and last summers. The night our son Daniel turned 40 and drank too much good whiskey and fell asleep on the porch, and we covered him with a blanket and didn't wake him. The morning Diane told me her scan had come back wrong. The morning I drove her down the mountain for the last time. That cabin knows me the way almost nothing else on earth does. And Claire wanted the deed to it. Already drawn up, already notarized. Slid across the table with a tab on the page where I was supposed to sign. My granddaughter Lily was at the table. She is 8 years old. She had maple syrup on her wrist, and she was telling me about a book her teacher had given her about salmon migration. She'd gotten onto salmon because of me, because of the work, because she is a child who asks questions that matter. I was listening to her. I was pouring her more orange juice. And across from me, Claire was watching me the way a contractor watches a building she's already won the bid to tear down. Honestly, when I tell this story, and I've turned it over so many times in the months since, the thing that stops me isn't even what happened next. It's the quiet before it. The pancakes. Lily's syrup sticky wrist. The way ordinary Sunday mornings become the stage for the worst things. If you have ever been sitting in a peaceful room and felt the air change before anything was said, you know exactly what I felt in that moment. I looked at Claire and I said, "Lily, sweetheart, why don't you take your sketchbook down to the dock and see if you can find that osprey?" Lily grabbed her book without question, because she is a good kid, because she is in fact the best person in this story by a distance that cannot be measured, and the screen door clapped shut behind her. And then there were 3 of us and a manila folder on my kitchen table. Claire said, "Walter, we've been putting off a real conversation about the property for too long." I said, "Then talk." She said the cabin was a liability for a man my age. She said maintaining it alone was a physical risk. She said my son Daniel had been carrying the emotional weight of worrying about me since Diane passed, and that it was time to make the situation structurally sound. She said those words, structurally sound, with the confidence of a person who had rehearsed them many times in a car. She had the tabs on the folder. She had the notary block. She had the quiet, patient certainty of someone who had decided the outcome before they arrived. I looked at my son. Daniel is 42. I paid for his college. I co-signed his first apartment. I gave him the down payment on the house in Lake Oswego, $74,000 wired on a Wednesday morning in 2016 without a single condition attached. He had done contract legal work for my company for 3 years while he got his practice started, and I had paid him well above market rate because he was my son and I wanted him to get on his feet. I taught him to fish on that dock. I watched him cry on that porch the night Diane died. He was my only child, and he was sitting across from me with his eyes on a screen. I said, very quietly, "Whose names go on the deed?" Claire said. "Both of ours. Joint tenancy. Right of survivorship." I said, "And if the marriage ends?" She actually smiled. "Walter." "Don't be morbid." I looked at the folder. I looked at my son. I put my coffee down. I said, "I'm not signing this." She said, "Walter." I said, "Not today. Not next year. Not in any year." She said I was being selfish. She said I was making decisions out of grief and sentiment instead of good sense. She said she and Daniel had done their research, had spoken to a real estate attorney, had run the numbers, and that the arrangement they were proposing was in my interest as much as theirs. And I want to give her this, she believed it. Or she had told herself she believed it long enough that the difference had dissolved. That is the thing about Claire that I have spent months trying to understand, because she is not a monster. She is a woman who grew up watching her own family's security evaporate, who married a man with a father who had built real things, and who decided somewhere along the line that security justified anything. The wanting had calcified into something that felt, to her, like logic. I understand that. I do not forgive it, but I understand it. She stood up. I did not see it coming. I want to be clear about that. I did not see it coming because even after everything, the estate questions at Diane's reception, the years of Claire walking through my rooms like an assessor, the dropped visits, the phone calls that tapered to almost nothing, even after all of that, I did not believe the morning would go where it went. She walked around the table, and she slapped me. Open hand. Hard. Hard enough that my glasses slid down my nose and my coffee cup rattled in its saucer, and for a moment the room was nothing but a high, white ringing sound. A long silence. Daniel looked up from his phone. He looked at my face. He looked at Claire standing over me. And I watched my son, my only child, the boy I held in a delivery room during a February ice storm and cried over like a man who had just been given a second chance at everything. I watched him look at the situation for a full 5 seconds. And what he said was, "Dad, why do you always have to escalate things?" That sentence. Not the slap. That sentence. I want to tell you I stood up. I want to tell you I roared. I am a man who has spent 30 years on commercial fishing boats in the North Pacific, and I am not small, and I am not gentle by nature, and there is a version of that morning where I flipped that table and threw Claire off my porch into the lake and told my son to follow her. I did not do that. I sat very still for what felt like a long time. I straightened my glasses. I put my hands flat on the table, and I said, in a voice I did not recognize as entirely my own, too calm, too quiet, "I want both of you to go inside, pack what you brought, and be in your car in 20 minutes. Claire said she was sorry. She said she didn't mean it. She said she had been under so much pressure, work, and Lily's tutoring schedule and the mortgage, and she had overreacted, and couldn't we just, I said, "Claire, pack your bag." Daniel said, "Dad." I said, "Go." They went. Not because they were sorry, because they assumed I would diffuse, because people like that always assume the older person will come around by supper, because they had spent enough years reading me wrong to believe I would soften. They didn't know what I was walking out to the dock to do. If you have ever had to be calm in front of a child while something inside you was shaking, you know what the next 5 minutes felt like. Lily was lying on her stomach at the end of the dock, sketchbook open, watching the water. I sat down next to her. My right cheek was warm and my ears were still ringing faintly. I said, "Hey, little bird, Grandpa needs to make a couple of calls. Can you stay here on the dock for a little while?" She looked at me. "Kids see everything." She said, "Grandpa, your face looks funny," I said. I bumped it on the cabinet. "I'm fine." She looked at me for one more second, the way children look at you when they know you are lying but love you enough to let it go. Then she turned back to the water. I walked to the far end of the dock. I called my attorney. Her name is Ruth Caldwell. She is 64 years old. She has handled my legal work since 1997, and she has never once in 27 years let a call from me go to voicemail when she can help it. I gave her the facts in the order they happened. The folder, the deed, the slap, what Daniel said. Ruth was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then she said, "Walter, don't let them leave with anything that isn't theirs." "I'm leaving now," I said. "How long?" She said, 40 minutes if I push it. I said, "Push it." I made my second call to my financial manager, a man named Gordon Briggs out of Portland who has handled my accounts for 19 years. I told him I needed 3 things executed by end of business Monday. He said, "Go." First, every account Daniel had access to the investment account I had added him to in 2017, the Roth he had inherited from Diane's estate, and a small operating account at the company that still had his name on it from his contract years. Freeze all of it. Second, the family trust I had set up after Diane passed, with Daniel listed as primary beneficiary and trustee. I wanted it amended. I wanted Daniel removed as trustee. I wanted Lily moved up as primary beneficiary with a corporate trustee I could control. And I wanted language in the document that made clear, explicitly, that under no circumstances would Claire be permitted to act as trustee, co-trustee, or in any advisory capacity to the trust. Gordon said, "Ruth will have to sign off on the amendment language." I said, "Ruth is on her way here." Third, the Lake Oswego house, the one I helped them buy. Gordon said, "You're on that deed." I said, 20%, tenant in common. We did it that way on purpose. He said, "Diane's idea?" I said, "Diane was smarter than anyone in this story." He said, "Walter, you know what a partition action does." I said, "It gives them a choice. Buy me out at fair market value, which they cannot afford, or sell the house. I want them to sell it, Gordon. I want them to understand the cost of what happened on my porch this morning." He said, "Understood." I walked back up to the cabin. Daniel and Claire were in the kitchen. Claire had arranged her face into something that was meant to look like remorse. Daniel was leaning against the counter with a glass of water he didn't appear to be drinking. Claire said she had been thinking, and she wanted to apologize, and she hoped I could understand that she had been under enormous stress. I said, "Stop." She said, "Walter, please," I said. "Ruth Caldwell will be here in 40 minutes. You are welcome to stay until she arrives. I would prefer you leave now." Daniel said, "Why is your attorney coming?" I said, "She's bringing paperwork." He wanted to know what paperwork. I looked at my son. I thought about the morning I held him in a delivery room during an ice storm. I thought about the tuition checks, the co-signed lease, the $74,000 wired on a Wednesday. I thought about every single time I had told myself that giving without conditions was what a good father did, that the generosity was the point, that I didn't need to be thanked. I thought about the morning of Diane's reception, when Claire asked me about estate planning before the flowers had finished drying, and I had said not today instead of never. I thought about how many times I had said not today when what I meant was not ever, and never had the courage to say it. I thought about all of that, and then I said it. I said, "Daniel, for 35 years I have given you every single thing I had to give, and a lot of things I didn't have to give but gave anyway because you were my son, and I wanted your life to be easier than mine. I never asked for gratitude. I told myself that was because I was generous. But honestly, and I'm only understanding this right now, standing here in my own kitchen, the real reason I never asked was because I was afraid of the answer. I was afraid that if I asked for gratitude, I would find out there wasn't any." He started to speak. I held up a hand. "The one thing I needed from you this morning, not money, not a thank you, not anything I have ever once asked for, was for you to tell your wife that she does not get to put her hand on your father. In your father's house. At your father's table. After your father cooked her breakfast." He said nothing. "You didn't do it. You asked me why I was escalating. So the paperwork Ruth is bringing is going to give you an opportunity to find out what your life actually costs when I am not quietly covering the difference." Claire said I was being vindictive. Claire said I was punishing Lily. I said, "Lily is the one person in this house I am protecting." She didn't have an answer for that. She put her sunglasses on inside the cabin, which I will remember for the rest of my life as the most Claire thing she has ever done, and they left. I walked down to the dock. I told Lily that her mom and dad had to head back early but that I would call her that night. She hugged me around the waist and held on a second longer than usual and said, "Grandpa, are you okay?" I said, "I'm going to be, little bird." She said, "Promise?" I said, "I promise." Kids know things. I believe that. I have always believed it. Ruth arrived 43 minutes after my call, banker's box under one arm, reading glasses already on her nose. She came up the porch steps, took one look at my face, and said, "Theodore," I said. "Walter." She said, "Walter. We are going to be thorough." We sat at the kitchen table where the quitclaim deed still lay. Claire had left it, and we worked until well past 10 that night. We drafted a formal demand letter regarding the Lake Oswego property, and my intention to initiate partition proceedings. We drafted the trust amendment, elevating Lily, installing a corporate trustee, and inserting the language about Claire by name. And we drafted a third letter, the one that was hardest to write, formally removing Daniel from my personal estate, routing his would-be inheritance into a locked trust for Lily, with my sister-in-law Margot, a retired high school teacher from Bend, named as trustee. Ruth asked me twice if I was certain. I said. He watched her hit me, and asked why I was making it difficult. "I am certain." She nodded. She signed as witness. We FedExed everything first thing Monday morning. What happened over the next 6 weeks was not dramatic. It was methodical, and I have come to believe that methodical is worse. Monday afternoon, Daniel found the investment account frozen. He called me 4 times. I let it go to voicemail. He called Gordon. Gordon explained, politely, that the assets in question had always been mine, that Daniel's name had been on the account as a courtesy, and that the courtesy had been withdrawn. Tuesday, the operating account was closed. He had been pulling a few thousand a quarter from it for years, ostensibly for contract work he had stopped doing in 2019. I had let it ride because I told myself it was helping with Lily. It stopped Tuesday morning. Wednesday, the partition action was filed. That afternoon, Claire called me. I answered. She said I was going to force them to sell their house. I said, "I'm going to give you the opportunity to buy me out at fair market value or sell the house. Those are the options." She said they couldn't afford to buy me out. I said, "I know." She said, "What about Lily's school?" I said, "Lily's school is a very good public elementary, Claire, which she will attend without difficulty. The question is whether you will be fine. And I want to be honest with you, I no longer find myself particularly motivated by the answer." She said I was a cruel old man. I said, "I am a man whose face you put your hand on in his own home." Then I hung up. I have not spoken to her since. Thursday I changed the locks. Both doors, the boathouse, the shed. I gave keys to Ruth and to my neighbor Frank Delaney, who has watched the cabin every winter since 2001. Friday, the trust amendment was signed. By the end of that week, everything was done. Everything I had built for 35 years had been redirected. Lily's name was at the center of it, protected. Claire's name appeared in the trust document exactly once, in a sentence that read, "Under no circumstances shall the beneficiary's mother serve as trustee, co-trustee, or in any advisory role to the trust." I imagine Claire read that line at some point. I would have liked to see her face when she did. If you have ever been the one in a family who gives and tells yourself that the giving is its own reward, I need you to stop for a second with me here, because I spent 35 years telling myself that story. And it was only sitting on a dock with maple syrup on my granddaughter's wrist and a handprint on my face that I finally understood. Generosity without honesty is not generosity. It is avoidance. I was not being a good father when I wired that down payment without asking my son to put a single dollar beside it. I was being afraid. Afraid that if I asked for effort, he would tell me he had none to give. And that fear cost both of us him more than me. 9 days after the slap, Daniel drove up to the cabin alone. He sat in his car in the driveway for about 25 minutes. I watched him through the kitchen window, and I thought about the morning he was born, ice storm, February, and I held him in a delivery room and felt like I had been handed the whole world back after I'd lost it. He looked, sitting in that car, like a man who had not slept in a week. I let him in. I poured him coffee. We sat on the porch. He started with a speech. Claire's anxiety, the mortgage pressure, how he had been caught in the middle, how he hadn't known what to do. I let him go for about 90 seconds. Then I said, "Daniel, stop. You're telling me about your wife. I'm asking about you. You watched her hit me. You asked me why I was escalating. What are you sorry for, specifically? He tried again. I said, specific. And then my son, 42 years old, a practicing attorney, a man I have never seen cry since he was a teenager, put his face in his hands and wept at my kitchen table. He said, I'm sorry I didn't stand up. I'm sorry I said what I said. I'm sorry I let it get that far. I said, why didn't you? He said, because I'm afraid of her. And there it was. The sentence underneath all the other sentences. My son was afraid of his wife, and I had been so afraid of losing him that I had helped him build a life inside that fear. I want to be honest with you. I did not forgive him that morning. I am not built for instant absolution, and I have lived long enough to know that a single conversation does not close a wound that took years to open. But I said this. I said, the trust stands, the partition stands, the disinheritance stands. Those were things I gave, and I am taking them back because they were mine to give, and they are mine to take back. He nodded. But the door to this cabin is not closed to you, just to her. If you want a relationship with me, if you want Lily to have a grandfather that exists, it will not include Claire. It will not happen on her terms. And every single time you walk through that door, I am going to need you to be the version of yourself that I raised. I will not do that work for you. He said, what if I can't leave her? I said, then you've made your choice and I've made mine, and we'll both carry what we chose. He sat on that porch for another hour. He didn't make any promises. I respected that more than I would have respected a promise. The Lake Oswego house sold in March. Daniel and Claire moved into a 2-bedroom rental in Beaverton. I am told, through the particular efficiency of the Pacific Northwest grapevine, which operates with the same unsparing accuracy as any small-town one, that Claire tells people I am a controlling, emotionally abusive father-in-law who has manipulated her husband against her. I do not respond to any of it. There is nothing to respond to. Daniel and I have dinner once a month now at a diner in Troutdale. We split the check. We talk about Lily. We talk about salmon runs, and about what I am doing with my days, and about whether he's getting enough sleep. We do not talk about Claire. He has not left her. I did not expect him to. But the man across that diner table is different from the man who asked me why I was escalating. I can see him thinking now. I can see him catching himself. That is not a small thing. Lily comes to the cabin 1 weekend a month. Daniel drops her off and picks her up. Claire does not come onto my property. Lily does not know the full shape of what happened. She is 8. She knows Grandma Claire and Grandpa had a fight. That is enough for now. When she is older, I will tell her the truth, because I do not believe in building a family on beautiful lies, and because she is going to grow up into a world that will ask her to do hard things, and she deserves to know that the people she comes from did hard things too and survived them. On the Sunday mornings when Lily pads down the hall in her socks asking for blueberry pancakes, when she sits at the table where Diane once sat, when she tells me about her osprey sketch or what she wants to be when she grows up, or why salmon swim back to where they started on those mornings, I am exactly where I am supposed to be, in a cabin built by hand, in a chair my wife used to sit in, with the only person in the world who has ever had the right to ask me for the keys to anything. Diane, if you are listening, and I believe you might be, I should have said something sooner. I should have said it at the reception when your sister was still putting platters out, and you were barely in the ground, and Claire was asking me about estate planning. I should have said it every time I told myself that keeping the peace was the same as being a good father. I know now those are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. Being a good father means sometimes setting down the checkbook and picking up the truth. 3 things I want to leave you with, if you're still here. First, a person who cannot say no at their own breakfast table will eventually find someone willing to say yes for them and charge accordingly. Second, love that requires you to pay for it every year in order to maintain the relationship is not love. It is a lease, and leases always come due. Third, when the clarity finally arrives, and for some of you listening, it is already on its way, do not waste it. Do not soften by nightfall. Do not apologize for the locked door. Stand up the next morning and start building something different. 71 is not too late. 81 is not too late. The keys are yours until the day you decide, with full intention, to hand them to someone who has earned them. Lily has earned them. Nobody else in this story has. I am at peace with that. I am more at peace with it every Sunday morning she shows up at my door. I want to know what you would have done. Leave a 1 inch the comments if you think I was too hard on Daniel. Leave a 2 if you think I was right to draw the line exactly where I drew it. Leave a 3 if you've been at a table like that one, if you've sat across from someone reaching for something that was never theirs and you want to talk about it. Because I have a feeling more of you are sitting at that table than will admit it. And if you are, the keys are still yours. Every single one of them. Where are you watching from tonight? What time is it where you are? I want to know. Drop it in the comments. This is the kind of story that finds people at odd hours, and I want to know who you are. If this channel has given you one story that made you feel less alone, please subscribe. That is all I'm asking. Hit the button and stay with us. There are more stories coming, real ones, the kind that don't tie up in a bow, and you should be here for them. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Portland, Oregon, to create completely original content. Any resemblance to actual people, locations, or events is coincidental and unintentional.